Welcome to Season 3 of This Is Your Life in Silicon Valley, a podcast about the Bay Area, technology, and culture. I'm your host, Sunil Rajaraman, and I'm joined by my co-host, Yasha Kakis-Wolf. This Is Your Life in Silicon Valley is brought to you by The Bold Italic. How much research did you do today before today's interview?
Like a lot or enough?
I think I screwed up a little bit, didn't I?
Well, it was friendly.
We'll let our listeners decide, but we are happy to welcome City Attorney Dennis Herrera to today's episode.
I didn't realize the uniqueness of the city attorney that we have here. Dennis, for sure, but just the function of the city attorney in San Francisco.
He's doing a lot of very, very important work. He's an elected official, and very rare opportunity to interview him.
This is a really cool conversation, and for anybody that is interested in Bay Area politics, this is a must listen.
We hope you enjoyed today's show.
I think that would be unreasonable for me to come in here and then lay out the guidelines for you.
Well, we appreciate that, and appreciate you being here today. Thank you for spending some time with us.
I'm very happy to be here.
Are you a San Francisco native?
I am not. I'm originally from New York. I grew up in Queens till I was about 6 or 7, and then I moved to a town about 40 minutes outside Manhattan by the name of Glen Cove, Long Island, and that's where I grew up.
Glen Cove, Long Island. You were like, "Hey, I'm going to move to San Francisco."
No, not at all. I had never been to California until I came here for a summer job in 1987, and I was in law school in Washington, D.C., and I opened up the Washington Post, and there was an article on striped bass fishing out on Seal Rocks, and I said, you know what? California would be a cool place to go for the summer. So I flew out here.
I think I know where this is going.
Winter of '86 for a summer job, and I loved it. Then the firm gave me an offer. I said, all right, I'll do that for a couple of years, and then I'll go back to New York. Now it's 31 years later.
I thought you were going to go I showed up in the summer in San Francisco, and it was miserable and cold, but I stayed here anyways.
Well, I will tell you, there is some truth to that. Like, my mom is a born and bred New Yorker, and when she came and visited me that first summer, she said, "Oh yeah." I said, "Mom, it's cold here in the summertime." She's like, "Oh yeah, sure." Of course, she didn't think I knew what I was talking about. And she shows up in August, and it was a real foggy night, right? And she got the sweatshirt, and we're walking around the next day, and it was a foggy day. And she had one of the best lines I think I've ever heard. It was kind of making fun of San Francisco. She looks around. We're walking on Russian Hill, and she goes, "I don't know what you see in this damn place. This is Queens with hills and bay windows." So she's never been a huge fan. She's never been a huge fan, but I love it.
So you're a convert, though.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And where do you live now?
I live in Dogpatch.
Oh, nice.
I bought there in 1993. I live right up the street from the Hells Angels. They're my neighbor. And I've seen tremendous change, and people tell me I was visionary. I said, no, I was poor. So that's what I could afford at the time, and I love living in Dogpatch.
Have you seen the show Sons of Anarchy? FX?
I have not.
Oh, you got to check it out.
I have not.
About a biker gang in Northern California. Good one. I highly recommend
I
it.
got to check it out.
So now you're an elected official. You're a big man in this town.
Well, I'm an elected official. We'll leave it at that.
How did you tell us about your journey there? What prompted you to?
Yeah, I mean, I came out here, and by profession, I'm a maritime lawyer. I'm a shipping lawyer, but I always had an interest in politics and government. And when I came out here, I really didn't know anybody, and it was really at the height of the political club movement in the late 80s. And I got involved in local political clubs and democratic politics because I cared about it, but also because it gave me a social network. I got to meet people. And then I got involved with the California Democratic Party. And then when Bill Clinton decided to run for office, I supported him for president. I went back and served for 2.5 years as acting as chief of staff of the Maritime Administration in Washington, D.C. But I used to come home every 6 weeks. Then I came back, went back to my law firm, and knew I was going to stay involved in some way. And I decided, if I ever run for office, because people had approached me, I said I want to run for an office that I know I can make a contribution in, and not just to be an elected official. So I had been approached to run for Board of Supervisors, and I think that really didn't interest me. But when my predecessor decided not to run, I said, there you go. That's the one job that I know I would enjoy, and I can make a real difference in it. And decided to run for city attorney in 2001, and in an upset, I won. So I've been there 17 years.
And for those of our listeners who aren't as well educated about all of the different functions of local government, like what's your responsibility? Like what do you own?
Sure. The easiest way to think about it is I am the Attorney General of the city and county of San Francisco. The only thing I don't do is prosecute criminal matters, but I'm the general counsel to over 100 city departments, agencies, and commissions. We draft all the legislation. We do all the labor negotiating. We draft all the contracts. Whenever the city has a claim or is sued, I'm the legal representative. And then I have another power that I use quite often for consumer protection, which is I can essentially step into the shoes of the Attorney General of the state, one of 4 city attorneys that can do that, and I sue in the name of the people of the state of California. And we usually use that for unfair business practices cases on consumer protection matters. So I can do that as well. And when I'm doing that, I'm not representing the city, I'm representing the people. So it's about 190 lawyers in my office, and that's what we do.
So, one of the things that happened this past week, I've been watching the news on Google and Sundar Pichai, testifying in front of Congress, and you hear this often. How would you respond to the assertion that, people who are in elected office, they don't understand tech? What would be your response to that?
I can make the same argument the other way, that unfortunately there are people in tech that might not understand government. And I think that there is a bridge that needs to be built, understanding that we need to celebrate technological innovation and the entrepreneurship that our tech community brings. But at the same time, it can't be done in such a way that ignores the responsibilities that elected officials have to look out for a broader community, and that also celebrates what we each bring to the table. And that's something that I think that, I'm sort of uniquely positioned to try and build that bridge, because when you're a legislator, you really can't, you have a constituency that you're going for, right? In my role as city attorney, what is it that I can bring to the table? I can help bridge that gap between what needs to be going on in the community, in the business community, and what it is my client, the other elected officials of government, are trying to accomplish. And sometimes that is done, unfortunately, in a forum of a litigation environment. My hope is that we can do that in a way previous to that, where I can help bridge that gap. So I think that there's a little bit of there's probably validity on both sides of the argument.
Well put.
I think that the storyline, at least that I feel like I hear most, is that technology companies in San Francisco in particular are taking advantage of tax schemes that have helped them move in here, but they're not contributing back to the city in a meaningful way. And I'm just kind of curious if that's something that you buy into with the current administration in San Francisco.
No, I wouldn't say that. I wouldn't. I don't think that that's necessarily true. Certainly, there's no doubt that there were tax schemes that were put in place to help attract business. That we've done that over the years for a lot of businesses or a lot of industries. I do think that there has been outreach by, we're talking specifically about tech community, going out to give back to the community and from a philanthropic perspective. And giving back, whether it be money or time. And I think that needs to be celebrated and acknowledged. What I do think is true on the other side of the equation, though, that there are some folks, and I'm not saying all, that you got to get away from the arrogance of thinking we always know best. Mm-hmm. And I think that people in the tech world need to be sensitive to the fact that there may be people in government or in the community that have a perception that tech folks are always going to sit there and say, well, we know best, we know better than you, and it's an antiquated.
In other words, we can kind of be assholes. No,
it's legit. And look, unfortunately, people are speaking different languages, right? Yeah. So how do we bridge that and understand that, we need to celebrate the innovation and ingenuity, and, but we have to look out for the broader construct. So that's I think, when you think of the fact that historically San Francisco had always been a service place for Silicon Valley, but now it is of Silicon Valley, right. People are getting used to speaking the same language, and they need to. And I think that people are feeling through. But I think the tech community has stepped up philanthropically, politically, and other ways to sort of help deal with the problems that we have here in San
I'm just going to
Francisco.
go for it. Which tech company or tech companies do you think are most destructive to San Francisco?
I'm going to sit here and tell you that I don't think that there is a tech community company that is the most destructive. I have my own opinions about who I think actually is probably more concerning, and it's not a tech company. It is, for me, I look at PG&E and the battles that we've had with them over the years and what they've done to shareholders, how they haven't necessarily, in my opinion, invested in infrastructure with, unfortunately, tragic consequences. And to me, and what we're dealing with, I would say that for me, they're much more of a concern. By the same token, I would say that it is no secret that I've subpoenaed records from a couple of from Uber and Lyft on issues relating to driver safety and whatnot, to make sure that they're conducting their business in a very, very positive way that is not contributing to creating a public nuisance out on the streets. And that's not necessarily an indictment of them as companies. It's just like I have to make sure that the benefits that they are bringing out on the streets, which they certainly are not doing it in such a way that, we're having, like I'm talking about earlier, that bridge, that we're not having guys that are out on the street that are overworked, that are undertrained, that are not sensitive to handicap needs and the like. So I think in that transportation sphere, we have to really look more closely.
What about Airbnb?
Airbnb is interesting because there's an example of something that I think you saw a public policy response that has worked positively. And let me tell you what I mean by that. Recall there was a bunch of rules that were put in by the San Francisco Board of Supervisors with respect to Airbnb. And essentially, 90-day limitations, and you have to register and have a number before you can be listed on the website. And if you're not, then you could go after the host. Airbnb sued, on that. We won that lawsuit. And what has happened? That has actually been something that has worked well. You have seen a lot of illegal listings come off the board, and those are now available for residents to rent. And at the same time, they're able to conduct their business, and they have been actually very helpful in helping us continuing to police to make sure that we're going after bad actors. So I actually think that the public policy response to a problem that was identified by folks has had a positive response that has resulted in cooperation between the company and the city.
I'm kind of curious, maybe the other side of that coin, of the question that Sunil asked, is who's the company that you think sets the archetype for the way that you want to engage, the way that you want to build that bridge? Like, is there a company or a person or a group of people?
I think Salesforce and Mark Benioff, I really respect how he has stepped up. Both individually and Salesforce as a company understands, look, this is his home city. He has a respect for the public policy process. He puts his money where his mouth is philanthropically. He wants to engage his workforce in giving back to the community, and he's contributed to education. I think that he understands the necessity of playing responsibly in the public policy sphere, and I very much admire him.
I mean, as you think about the future, what do you think about? What are the pending problems that you're going to have to think about? We're all going to have to think about. It could be self-driving cars, AI. I don't know. What are things that you're thinking about?
I think that something we really need to think about from a technology perspective and how we manage what's going on in the cities, how we deal with our traffic. And I'm not just talking about driverless cars. I mean, and I don't know the answers, but how to manage traffic flow in the city, because look, we have now probably more than 100,000 people more than we did 10 years ago, probably 125,000. And we don't have a transportation infrastructure to support that. We have buses, but those are buses that are out on the street. You go to New York, you got subways everywhere. And real transportation networks that can move people quickly and efficiently serve a number of different purposes, obviously. It gets cars off the street, mobility, but it does something else, which I think is really important. And that is, it is the great equalizer. If you go to New York, you see rich folks, you see poor folks, you see all sorts of individuals on public transit on the subways and is the great equalizer at building community and people understanding the value of government. It becomes the metaphor for what government is. And we don't have a sufficient system here. So I think that how we manage that and what we can do is probably one of the most important things that we collectively need to focus on.
I have this story in my head that maybe is completely wrong, but part of how I understand our transportation system to be as challenging as it is that it isn't just about San Francisco. It's about working with the other counties and the other cities, and there hasn't traditionally been a very good set of relationships there. Is that changing at all? Is that a right story, first of all?
That is true, but I would say that that's not the reason that we don't have great public transit in San Francisco. That's certainly a contributing factor, but it is not the only reason. And if you think about it, there are transportation challenges that are not just unique to San Francisco. BART going around the Bay Area has the same issues. They have old equipment. They don't have enough capacity. And that's something that you are seeing Bay Area wide. And I think that is, we have two issues, right, that are the big issues for the Bay Area. It's cost of housing and transportation. And these are the things that we need to be able to focus on.
How much of your time do you spend thinking about federal issues as opposed to San Francisco issues?
Well, in today's day and age, actually, a fair amount. I mean, with the Trump administration in office and demonizing immigrant communities and what they've done going after sanctuary or what they've done going after healthcare, the environment, actually a lot. We file a fair amount of cases challenging what the current administration has done. I mean, most significantly and probably in a most notable fashion was we were the ones to file the first lawsuit against the sanctuary city executive order that he tried to put forth in the first couple of weeks of his administration, and we got the nationwide injunction halting its implementation. So we do a fair amount.
So just how destructive is this administration? I'm assuming you believe it's destructive, and a lot of people do, especially here. What is an anecdote you would have that would just illustrate, as it's sort of maybe outside of things that people read day to day, just how destructive the administration is?
To me, it really comes down to just threatening the institutions that sort of are the pillars of American democracy. We read about them every day, going after the judiciary, the media. People don't realize how important and destructive what he's doing is. And what I mean by that is people always say, oh, well, we have the checks and balances to keep them in check. The checks and balances are only as strong as institutional bulwarks as the people who lead them. And they have to have the personal strength to sort of stand up. There are a lot of things that people don't really think about, that there are unspoken rules about how you conduct yourself, how you interact with different institutions, whether it be legislative branch of government or the media or the judiciary, that sort of assumes a certain level of good faith that everybody brings to the table. And his utter destruction of that, I think, threatens those pillars. And that, to me, that's something that people can't ever lose sight of, that our democracy is it's strong, but it's fragile. And it depends on the strength of the individuals at the head of those institutions to make sure that they can work.
When you think about your kind of current administration, the group of people that you work with here in San Francisco, what's a topic area that you're spending a lot of energy on that you just don't feel like gets airtime or isn't part of the story that you want the people in San Francisco to actually hear about?
You know, our office gets involved in so many things. Like I said, we're general counsel over 100 city departments, agencies, commissions, so we're involved in everything. And a huge thing that sort of doesn't get that much attention, but is really important. In some ways, it got a little attention today because on the front page of the paper is water supply, and what we're doing, working to ensure that Hetch Hetchy water continues to flow to San Francisco. That's not something that people understand, but we have a huge water infrastructure here in San Francisco that serves not just the city but the Bay Area more generally. Yeah, and we're really involved in that.
Yeah. Well, I was always fascinated with like Chinatown and the story behind Chinatown and the relationship to Mono Lake in Los Angeles. And I expect that water and water rights are going to be much more of an issue that we're all aware of over the course of the next few decades.
It's absolutely right. I tell people that are coming out of law school now, if you want to you want to have a career, be a water lawyer in California. I mean, you understand so many things. You're going to just climate change impacts it. You understand federal-state relations, local community relations. You have to understand politics. You got to be a darn good lawyer. You're always going to be valuable. You get involved in virtually everything, and you become an incredibly well-rounded legal professional.
What's a case that you're working on right now that could have broad implications on, the day-to-day lives of the residents of San Francisco? Is there something that you think about that, wow, this could really have a massive effect?
Well, I've been pretty lucky. We've had a whole lot of those. I mean, my office was the only one to be involved in virtually every marriage equality case in state court and federal court, and we fought that battle for 10 years. Right now, what we're doing on sanctuary and immigration more broadly impacts huge number of folks in San Francisco, and not just those in immigrant communities, but in communities more broadly in San Francisco, because it impacts public safety.
To give our listeners context, what is it specifically that you're working on in relation to sanctuary cities? Okay,
so the executive order that came out that we fought against, that we got a nationwide injunction against, ensures that San Francisco's sanctuary city policy continues to remain the law.
And can you describe what the policy is?
And the sanctuary city policy basically prohibits those in San Francisco government from giving anything with respect to citizenship or immigration status, limits that you can't stop. You don't have to cooperate with the feds on anything beyond that, right? So we don't have to let folks know when people might be who are on detainers, who are going to be leaving prison, and it has built trust in immigrant communities in San Francisco on the issue that we really have to face, and that is what's going on our streets. And if you have a community that doesn't feel like it can talk to law enforcement because they're going to get turned into the feds, you're going to have witnesses that don't come forward, victims of crimes that don't come forward, and that just doesn't impact those communities. It impacts non-immigrant communities as well. So this is something that is vitally important, not just in San Francisco, but across the state of California, when we are pretty much a state of immigrants. So it has huge impact on what happens in communities throughout California and actually throughout the country.
What's your view of the people who are trying to get California to secede?
I think it's kind of ridiculous.
I just had
maybe
to
not
ask.
secession, but what about the breakup into 5 different states?
I think it's
also ridiculous?
I think it's ridiculous. I mean, look, the last thing in the world we need in this country is more division. We need to celebrate coming together. And California is the 5th largest economy in the world, and I can't imagine a crazier idea than breaking it up into 5 little Californias.
We went from like 0 to 100 in this interview, right? This has been one of the most intense interviews that we've
really.
Had.
I hope that's good.
No, that's great. That's great. Let's maybe we should lighten it up a little bit. This has been like very. So where do you eat? Like what's your go-to restaurant? What's your go-to
in
restaurant?
Dogpatch?
In Dogpatch, I go to Pacino.
Yeah,
a lot. Mm-hmm. Pacino a lot, and right across the street there's a great
ice cream.
First the Japanese place, Aina, the corner of 22nd and Minnesota. You're right, Mr. and Mrs. Miscellaneous. Mm-hmm. If the guy lives across the street from me, but they try and manage a family. It's not open on the best hours. And now Magnolia has reopened again in a different construct. Wonderful. So I love the stuff in my neighborhood.
Yeah.
But I get around town. There's a lot of places I like.
Are you? Do you have higher aspirations? Are you going to be mayor someday?
Well, I ran for mayor in 2011.
I should have known that.
Damn,
internet research.
You got to do your research.
Oh, my God.
I mean, I was one of the favorites in the race. And then Gavin won for lieutenant governor, and we had Mayor Lee come in as interim mayor, and that kind of blew things up. But that's politics, right? Politics is not always predictable. So, that was a great experience, and that's the only election I've ever lost. Not an easy thing, but you learn a lot about yourself when you win as well as when you lose. So,
how's your relationship with Gavin?
Good.
First name basis?
Yeah, sure. I was texting with him yesterday, so we have a very good relationship.
Texting or WhatsApp or is Facebook Messenger? Or what?
No, it was just texting.
Oh, okay. What's your view of Facebook?
Well, it's interesting. People, I admit this. My wife always says you're a Facebook voyeur, because I don't post. Very rarely do I post, but I check up on things. So I think obviously it has done tremendous benefit, but with any new technology or new thing, you learn some bad things too. I don't like the anonymity it has given to allow people to be as virulent in their criticisms as others by hiding behind and just writing it instead of having a conversation. Some of the stuff I see posted that is so angry and hateful, I don't think that they would do that if they had to sit and have a conversation with somebody. So I don't like that.
It's so easy to be a social media tough guy, right?
Yeah. Oh, totally.
Yeah, it is, totally. And then obviously there's a lot of concerns about privacy issues and being used by trolls and folks that don't have our American democracy at heart to screw with our democracy. We need to get that under control, and we need to make sure we're protecting people's privacy. So there's a lot of good things, but we got to figure some of this other stuff out.
Yeah.
What do you want our listeners to take away from this podcast? Like what's something that, a message that you would just want to convey, that you would say, okay, if you take nothing else from this, take this 1 or 2 sentences from me.
A couple things that government isn't always. We've had 40 years in this country of 45 of people saying that government is always the problem and not part of the solution. I think that has led to, a lot of distrust of government in terms of motive or ability to impact, and I think that's totally wrong. Government has just as much of a place to work in partnership with business to better, and with individual communities to better society, and we need to work together and utilize all of these institutions to do things that are going to bring us together. And that's something that I'm committed to. And, I think I've demonstrated, of course, in my 17 years in office.
I think it's an important point. There's another kind of component to that I think is also meaningful. It's that the governmental offices are made up of individuals, and those individuals are real human beings, and they're not perfect all the time, and they're oftentimes trying to do something because they believe it's the right thing to do. And I think today has been cool for us getting to meet you, not just thinking about you as a name that we've got to put a check mark next to. We appreciate our time that you spent with us today. We do have one question that we want to close out.
What do you think of Yasha's scarf?
Yeah.
What do you think
I
of
like
that?
it. I like it. I wouldn't wear it myself.
Well.
Okay, but I like it.
He's always into the scarves. I never understand it. Every
it's
recording
winter.
session,
You
it's
can
a
wear
scarf.
a scarf from like November all the way through until...
Well, it's a light scarf.
Yeah.
It's not a heavy scarf.
He's very fashion forward, and it's something that it's like, he's my fashion idol. I would never put on a scarf. I just wouldn't do it. It wouldn't
But that scarf would match your shirt. You got a little red and white in there.
So Neil's my height idol. I wish I was as tall as him, but I don't wish I dressed like him. I'm teasing.
Yeah.
We have one very serious question that we ask to everybody that comes on the podcast. It's maybe not as serious as I make it out to be. You spend time on social networks. You said Facebook. Maybe you spend time on Twitter.
Yeah.
Who's a person or an organization that you follow that you think our listeners should listen to?
I think there's
as well?
two. I like Thomas Friedman very much and Paul Krugman from the New York Times.
Yeah.
And I follow both of them. I've always liked Tom Friedman from his very first book, From Beirut to Jerusalem, because I think he's a very thoughtful writer, and he has a great perspective on the international sphere and our place in it. And when you look at the two big issues, for me, what's going on in the world, how is the United States interacting with other countries and economies in an increasingly interdependent world? Okay, he's important. And Paul Krugman is because our problems or our issues, our future is so tied to economics. And I think those two go hand in hand, so I always make sure I follow them.
Yeah. One hot take extra question. 2020 election comes up nationally for the president. Who's the challenger?
I don't know. I will say this. Kamala Harris worked for me for 2.5 years. I'm a huge fan, and she's a personal friend, and she's going to make her decision over Christmas. I'd encourage her to make the right choice for her and for the country, and
throw her hat in the ring.
Throw her hat in the ring.
Yeah, when she announces, just tell her to come on the podcast and announce it on here.
I will do that.
We'll be happy to have her. She can make her
and she's good on radio. She'll be a lot of fun, I promise you.
Okay. This has been awesome today. Thank you so much for spending time out of your day with us.
No, thank you.
Thank you.
So Kamala Harris in 2020.
I mean, it could be possible, and we're hoping, after today's podcast, that she'll announce on our show.
I think Dennis promised that he's going to make that happen.
Well, aside from that promise, I have to say that this was well worth our time. This was an amazing interview.
Yeah, I felt like it wasn't just a fun conversation, but I learned a lot, and that's important.
It makes me want to work harder as somebody who is in technology to really, learn more about government and just civic responsibility in general.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. This was a really fun episode. If you enjoyed the episode as much as we enjoyed making it, please go back to the application you found this podcast on, rate us 5 stars, leave us a comment. It helps the podcast out a ton.
Thanks for joining us.